All right, we're a few minutes over time. Gave people a little more time to join, and I think we're still going to see more people come online, but I wanted to go ahead and get started because I know there is a lot going on. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Janine Benner, and I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Energy. Welcome to the webinar on ODO's 25-27 agency request budget. This is our public budget meeting, and really appreciate you being here. So we are going to start with some brief remarks from me, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michael Williams, who is our Assistant Director for Central Services, and he will share more information on the budget. He's going to take questions throughout, and then we also have other ODO team members on the line to answer questions as well. Looks like we lost our slideshow, but I'm going to be talking for a minute, so it's okay. Actually, if you can go to the next slide, we will be holding this meeting today, or we are holding this meeting as a WebEx event. And that means that ODO staff are panelists and presenters, and everyone else is an attendee. We're going to have a bunch of folks on the call today. So I think what that means is that and hopefully most of you have participated in virtual meetings before, and this should be review, but as an attendee, you won't be able to unmute your microphone or turn on your camera, but you are welcome to raise your hand for us to call on you, or you can use the chat function to ask questions and communicate with the ODO team. And because attendees I don't think you'll be able to see other attendees, who else is on the call. I'd welcome anybody who would like to introduce yourself in the chat. If you'd like to just tell us your name and if there's an energy supplier or organization that you're representing today, that way folks can see who is on the call. So again, if you have questions as we go through the budget presentation, please use the chat box. You can see that on the slide here. It's on the bottom right. There's a little chat icon. And select your chat to go to all panelists. So our team will be monitoring the chat box and will either respond in the chat or raise the question to the presenter. If you raise your hand and we call on you to speak and ask a question, the host will unmute you and you will be able to ask that question. And for those of you on the phone, you can press *6 to raise your hand. Again, *6 to raise your hand and *3 to unmute yourself when we call on you. And then finally, if you have questions that occur to you after the meeting is over, you are also welcome to send questions to our Ask Energy email address. That email address is askenergy@oregon.gov, and hopefully my colleague Jenny can put the address in the chat. All right. Next slide, please, Michael. So in case you are unfamiliar with the Oregon Department of Energy, what you see on this slide is our mission and what we do. We help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. On the bottom half of the slide, you can see the ways in which we work to achieve this mission. And the agency request budget that you'll hear about today represents the resources we think we need to be successful in meeting this mission and doing our work. Next slide, please. And now for those of you who don't live and breathe state agency budgets like Michael and me, this is a high-level reminder of how the process works. So what we're presenting to you today is ODO's Agency Request Budget, or ARB. And this budget was developed according to the process prescribed by the state. It happens in the same way every biennium. And it started with a current service level budget, or CSL, which is an estimate of continuing to administer our currently legislatively approved programs into the next biennium. To that CSL, we add policy option packages, which provide additional resources to the agency to enable us to do our work. Like all agencies, we are also required to submit a list identifying possible budget reductions to current service level. We will submit all of this to the Department of Administrative Services on August 1st. So the materials that we'll present today, which are also on our website, and my colleague will drop a link in the chat, or you can find them by going to About Us in the top menu bar and clicking on Budget. These materials demonstrate how we arrive at our agency request budget, what the money is used for, how our programs and activities are funded, and what the projections are for the energy supplier assessment if the legislature chooses to adopt this budget. For those of you unfamiliar with the energy supplier assessment, it's an assessment, a fee charged to fuel providers and utilities that produce energy in Oregon. The ESA helps fund the Oregon Department of Energy. All Oregonians pay for the ESA when they pay for energy. In 2023, it was about $1.87 for each Oregonian for the year, and it will be a little bit higher this year if this budget passes. So we're going to walk through our budget program by program. Please feel free to ask questions during the presentation. Again, submit them through the chat function to all panelists or raise your hand. And we'll also try to leave time for questions at the end, but there's a lot of information to cover, so we'll try to get through everything. If there is additional information that you'd like to see about our budget that isn't in this presentation, please ask, and we'd be happy to provide you with whatever we can and as much information as you'd like about our budget. Last month, we presented our current service level budget and our draft proposed policy option packages to the Energy Advisory Work Group. So really appreciate those of you who participated in that conversation and offered feedback. And some of what we'll talk about today will be a repeat for EAWG members, but this presentation will go into greater detail. As a reminder, the agency is required to hold this meeting by ORS 469421, Section 8, which states that, quote, prior to filing an agency request budget, the director shall convene a public meeting with representatives of energy resource suppliers and other interested parties for the purpose of providing energy resource suppliers with a full accounting of the projected revenue needed to fund each program, each department program or activity, and the projected allocation of monies derived from the assessment to each department program or activity. All right, next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce Michael in just a minute, but for those of you who may not be able to stay for the whole meeting, I wanted to go over some key takeaways. So first, I just want to acknowledge that this is the beginning of the budget conversation. Our budget will change as it goes through the process. The economic outlook is uncertain, and as the state's revenue picture comes more into focus, it will affect the budget that the legislature ultimately passes for ODOE. A lot can change between now and next June, which is when the 2025 legislative session will wrap up and our budget will be final. Second, the budget process is a bit different this year in that agencies received guidance from the governor that our agency request budgets needed to result in an overall statewide balanced budget. So in the past, agencies could ask for what they think is needed in their ARBs. This time, we're limited to a 1% increase in general fund in order to make sure all of the requests from different agencies result in a relatively balanced budget. So for this reason, we have only a small set of policy option packages that seek resources above and beyond our CSL. And I want to highlight here that the policy option packages that we're seeking are mostly general fund and will have an overall effect of slightly decreasing the ESA from what it would have been under the current service level budget. What we're presenting today incorporates some minor changes from what we presented to the EAWG last month based on their feedback. One of the most resounding areas of feedback we received from the ESA payers on the Energy Advisory Work Group is that with the limitation on using general funds in our budget, we should not shift costs from general funds to the ESA. So we have taken that recommendation. Even though ESA, you will see, is going up from last biennium, I want to make sure you understand that it's not because we're shifting any existing costs from programs onto the ESA. So on the ESA, and we'll share more details on this as we go through the presentation, but I know many of you are curious. If this agency request budget were adopted as proposed, the ESA for the next biennium would be $18.6 million, which is 18% higher than this biennium. So I recognize that this is a big increase, and it is especially difficult to contemplate with the energy rate increases we're already seeing. There are two main drivers for this, and I'm going to introduce this idea at a high level, and Michael will explain further. So if you have questions, he'll probably answer them later in the presentation. So first, one of the major drivers for increasing costs is an increase in personal services costs, which all agencies are implementing as cost of living adjustments take effect. Second, there's been a big increase in government service charges that state agencies need to pay. This is ODOE supporting the broader state enterprise, such as Department of Justice, Secretary of State, and Department of Administrative Services. At the same time that our administrative costs are increasing, the number of general funded staff are decreasing. So as Michael will explain, our current service level budget includes fewer positions than we currently have because the general funded incentive programs like solar and storage and heat pumps are considered one-time funded programs by the legislature. This means they don't show up in our 25-27 budget. So the current service level budget phases out the programs and the staff that run them, and we're not proposing to add those programs back to our ARB because they would exceed that 1% increase to general fund programs that we're allowed. So why does this matter to the ESA? Well, all of the positions at the agency contribute to our indirect cost pool, otherwise known as our administrative overhead, with the funding source that supports them. With fewer general funded programs contributing to overhead, more of that cost falls on ESA funded positions. So it's not that we're shifting any positions from general fund to ESA or that we're adding more ESA funded positions, it's that there are fewer general fund positions to help bear the administrative costs. So I know you probably all have a lot of questions about those. Again, hopefully Michael will answer them in the next hour, but I'm going to pause before I turn it over to Michael to see if you have, to see if anyone has any questions on what I've presented so far. Okay, not seeing any raised hands or questions in the chat. Michael, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thanks, Janine. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope your summer's going well. Thanks for joining us, taking some time to learn about our budget. I'm excited to share information about the great things the team at ODOE is working on and will be doing. For the next while, I'll be walking you through the work of the department and give a full accounting of the resources we are requesting for the 25-27 biennium. Today, we will go over the components of developing the agency request budget, or ARB, and then we'll talk about the overall 25-27 ARB, followed by a deeper dive into the work and budgets for each of ODOE's divisions. And we'll follow that with information on the estimated impact to the energy supplier assessment. I will try not to slip too far into budget jargon during the presentation, but if you feel, if anything comes up, feel free to just ask for clarification. And before I dive into all of that, I just wanted to familiarize everyone with some terms you will see throughout the presentation. One is personal services, and that includes things like salary, retirement costs, and healthcare related to employee compensation costs. And as Janine mentioned, that is one of the significant cost drivers of this budget. Services applies, and that includes costs for equipment, facilities, supplies, and contracted services within the agency. Special payments are expenditures for which the department isn't the primary beneficiary. So things like incentive payments that go to other agencies or grant payments. And debt service, which is where we spend on principal, interest, and premiums related to the debt from our small scale energy loan program. So with those slides, I'll just go into the next one here with those terms. And this is a timeline of the steps the agency completes to develop the agency request budget that will be submitted to the governor and DAS on August 1st. We start with the legislatively approved budget for the current biennium, and that's the starting point for creating an agency budget. We adjust for the cost of living and merit step increases to create a base budget. And these costs are determined by the Oregon Department of Administrative Services for all agencies. We need to make several adjustments to the base budget to determine the current service level, which is the amount needed to administer legislatively approved programs in the next biennium. The CSL was submitted to the state CFO's office on the May 31st and presented to the Energy Advisor Work Group in June after audit. And again, most of these figures are calculated and determined by DAS and current legislation, which you see in there, like the vacancy savings and differentials and what needs to phase in and phase out. And I want to particularly call out the phase in and phase out step where we need to remove programs and resources that were only funded in the current biennium using one-time funding, and even in some cases if that program is expected to continue into the next biennium. And you can see that phase out will happen with most of our incentive programs. We then add policy option packages to the current service level budget to arrive at the agency request budget that is submitted to the state CFO's office later this week. As we dive into the accounting of our ARB, I want to remind everyone that this process is iterative. The governor's recommended budget will be released this December and may look different than what our agency request budget shows you today. Ultimately, we won't know the agency's actual budget until it is approved by the legislature, which could happen as late as June 2025. But we'll do our best to keep you informed as we move throughout the process. There it goes. Okay, looks like it went. So as I mentioned before, personal services, talking about significant changes to our base budget and driven by personal services that are related to the compensation. And there were a few significant adjustments between the 23-25 and 25-27 base budget. And this includes the cost of living and merit step increases, which were negotiated by the governor and which generally take place every biennium and are then built into the following biennium's base budget. We also have to phase out limited duration positions that are statutorily scheduled to end. Moving on to the current service level budget, which represents what it would take to continue our programs that are currently approved by the legislature for the next biennium. Here we phase out programs that aren't approved for the next biennium and make any adjustments for short session impacts, adjust for inflation, and account for any fund shifts. You can see on this slide that we did have to phase out some of our incentive programs and some of the one-time costs associated with the Oregon Climate Action Commission and building performance standards that are phased out of this budget as startup costs, but the programs themselves will continue into the next biennium. Inflation figures you see here are provided to ODOE and all executive branch agencies by the Department of Administrative Services. For reference, also on this one, the different components of the budget you see here are referred to as packages in the system. So that's a little bit of our budget jargon that I tried to stay away from, but that's why you see them referred to here as packages in this slide. Okay. So I guess I'll pause there, see if there's any questions so far. All right. So now we'll go through a series of slides breaking down the agency request budget. The agency request budget is created when we add our policy option packages to the CSL. And so these slides may look similar to slides presented at last month's EAWG for those of you that were there, but they are slightly different and reflect the different phases of the budget process. These graphs show ODOE's ARB for 25-27 by division within the department, by each division within the department. And to the left is ODOE's total budget, which is predominantly the Energy Development Services division, which includes the inactive small scale energy loan program, or SELP, and the remaining Community Renewable Development Grant Program. So SELP is an inactive program and is fairly transactional. borrowers make payments on their loans, and we use that revenue to pay off our debt service on the SELP bonds. On the right side is the operating budget for the department. This doesn't include debt service payments in the SELP program or special payments or incentive money that we distribute and we feel is a better representation of what it costs to run the agency on a day-to-day basis. The operating budget includes personal services such as salaries for staff, the services and supplies to cost to administer ODOE's programs, and day-to-day operations.
Michael,
Yes.
we have a question in the chat, and I thought I'd interrupt to ask it.
Okay.
Could you go over package 22 again?
Yes. So is this slide showing up? Package 22 back here. So the phasing out of programs. Package 22 is our phase out package, and it includes the any services, supplies, capital outlay, or special payments that we have to phase out. In the current biennium, we have several incentive programs, including the solar plus storage rebate program, the wildfire relief program, and community renewable grant and heat pump programs that were included in the budget that we have to phase some or all of the money out for that they were provided, and cooling needs study, which we were provided we provided funding to complete a study. That study's completed, so we have to remove that funding from our budget. And this is, I guess, a good time to talk about like going back to our starting point is what was approved in the last legislative session through all of our budgets. So things that were approved are included in our budget. If they're for studies or one-time things that the legislature doesn't anticipate going off, the package 22 is one of the mechanisms for making sure that those costs come out of the budget. We also had partial one-time startup costs that the legislature provided for programs around the building performance standards for building a database, and the Oregon Climate Action Commission and the Energy Technology Fund to fund some studies that were going to be done in the County Resilience Plan, planning to run that program. And, and again, I think that if in this scenario, the things that you see phased out are because the our current resources our general ARB policy option package was supposed to be limited to the 1% that Janine mentioned in her opening here. Go ahead, Janine, sorry.
Oh, no, you actually said what I was going to say. So thanks for covering that. Yeah, these were one-time funded programs. It's not that they're eliminated from the budget. It's just that's how long the legislature funded them for. And so because they would represent more than a 1% increase to our current service level budget, they're not being included in our agency request budget moving forward. Again, that's a guidance that we got from the governor's office this year to make sure that state agency budgets together will balance. It could change if there's a different revenue forecast, in which case maybe the legislature can put some additional funding into these programs, but it's not going to show up in our agency request budget or our current service level budget. And I see another question about whether there are new funding streams that could be allocated to the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program and the heat pump program. On heat pumps, yes, we anticipate that we will be able to spend some of the climate pollution reduction grant funding that was announced last week on heat pump programs. That was part of the $197 million that we got from the US EPA. So that's really good news. That's going to be coming to us in 2025. We haven't identified another source of funding for community renewable grants yet. That would be something that the state would need to reinvest in. That program is not quite out of money yet. So we'll be having another round of CREP grants. So hopefully that answers Nicole's question. And then I see another question: how and when is it determined which of those programs will be phased back into the budget or another budget? And that is, sorry, I'm catching up in the chat. I see that I answered that. That's really a question to the legislature. And I'm on a roll here reading the chat. So sorry, Christy, doing your job, but I've already got the mic. How at all does the 1% limitation on budget growth apply to the ESA? Presumably it does not apply if 18% increase is anticipated. Thanks, Jennifer, for the question. The 1% increase is specifically to general fund. So the increase in the ESA is really a result of other actions and not an active choice by ODOE to increase the ESA by 18%. Will the one-stop shop on energy incentives be funded? I'm going to ask Christy to answer that question, actually.
Sure. Thanks. I'm back. By the way, I should have said I'm Christy Split, our government relations coordinator. I know a lot of folks on the call, but not everyone. And I'll be handling some questions in the chat here and there. And this particular one is interesting. We did get one-time funding to do this work, but the way that we got it was in positions, and those positions are permanent. So those positions will stay, or it's one position, that position will stay. It's an IT position. And then meanwhile, we will have some vacancy savings from a related position that's working on the home energy rebates. And that vacancy savings, we have a policy option package to roll over in order to make enhancements to the one-stop shop over time in the 25 to 27 biennium.
Thanks, Christy. Seeing one more question, which is on the wildfire rebuilding incentives. Those were also one-time funded by the legislature. So unless the legislature puts more money into those, they will not carry over into our next biennial budget. Okay, Michael, back to you.
All right. I think we are on slide 11 here. And thank you everyone for questions. Thanks, Janine and Christy, for helping there. And so this slide is a 10-year history of ODOE's budget, and many of you are maybe be familiar with this chart from previous discussions. But for those people that are new, just want to orient you to what the different colors are on all the bars before getting into takeaways. The dark blue other funds non-limited represents self-bonding authority, which was phased out when the program stopped lending activity. So you can see that that stopped in this 2017-2019 biennium. But as you can see from the turquoise bar, which is other funds debt service non-limited, the agency still does have to repay bonds and service the loans issued before the program stopped lending, and it represents a sizable but shrinking portion of our budget. As I mentioned earlier, the agency repays these bonds with money coming from the SELP projects and repaying their loans. And in the current biennium, we did, as you see in a phase out, we did have some general fund support there. The light blue and purple bands are also related to debt service for the lottery bonds. The top neon green bar represents federal funds that the agency receives, such as the State Energy Program and the Hanford grants. And you can see a significant increase in federal funds in the current biennium because of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. This funding continues into the next biennium, and we anticipate this part of the budget growing as we incorporate awards received after the agency requests budget development, like the climate pollution reduction grants, homes and heat, home energy rebates, and solar for all. We have divided other funds into two categories: expenditures that were projected, expenditures that are projected to be supported with ESA, or energy supplier assessment, and that's the orange bar, and the balance of other funds expenditures that are budgeted for using fees, services, grants, and the non-ESA portion of the indirect rate. The pink bar represents general fund. ODO did not receive significant general fund until 2021, as you can see from this chart. You'll see an even larger one-time general fund investment in the current biennium as the legislature invested in general funds programs, which had the effect of diversifying our funding streams. You can see that much of that investment does not continue into the next biennium, given the 1% current service level target on general fund expenditures. The legislature did provide ongoing funding for programs in HB 3409 for building performance standards and climate change, and that does continue into the next biennium. So you can see that our general fund originating programs are, it's not as much as it was, but there's still a significant portion of the agency's budget. You will notice the dramatic decrease in general fund in the pink as the programs are phased out. And there's a slight increase in the federal funds that we talked about before, as our federal dollars from those two bills start to roll in at the top there. And we anticipate that this will continue to grow as a portion of the budget as Oregon is hopefully awarded more federal dollars. And everything else on there is changed. And then just for also while we're orienting people, for reference, in the prior biennia, when ODO received general fund dollars for a specific purpose, those dollars had to be transferred into a dedicated fund in order to be spent. And this resulted in a technical accounting adjustment that needed to be made, an internal transfer to our budget. That made our budget seem bigger than it is, or might seem bigger than it really was. And that is that clear bar with a pink outline that you see in the 21-23 biennium. And as you will notice, do not see in the 25-27 ARB. So before I go on, I should just double check. That was a lot of information. Are there any questions on this slide? And Christy, if there's anything in the chat, just please let me know.
Yeah, if you're feeling ready for a question from the chat, we do have one from Danelle. Hey, Danelle.
Okay.
Has ODO proposed current service level cuts to ESA funded programs in order to mitigate the projected ESA increase?
Thanks for the question, Danelle. So the CSL does not have, we'll talk later about where ODO is looking at where cuts could be necessary or be taken if necessary. The current service level budget, as I was saying, a lot of that is determined by the Department of Administrative Services rolling forward our current spending and adjusting for inflation and state government service charges. And there's not a lot of opportunity for ODO in that budget to make cuts that aren't prepared by the legislature. So not programs that the legislature has said are going to phase in or phase out. The assumption in building the current service level budget is, as the name kind of says, sticking to the current service level. But ODO, as we'll talk about later, does want to be conscious of the effect on ESA and look at areas that in the coming biennium, in the current biennium, we can look to potentially reduce those impacts.
Michael, if I could just jump in and add, it is something that we are thinking about, Danelle, both in terms of how we can reduce our spending on the ESA in this biennium, because anything we don't spend in this biennium can carry forward to offset the costs in the next biennium. So as I think I've mentioned to some folks on this call, we've reduced our office footprint significantly, which will lower the amount that we have to pay for rent. We've been taking a close look at our travel and training budget. And these are the kind of things that we are also looking at into the next biennium, and we'll be getting to at the very end of this call with a list of potential reduction options that are under consideration for us to include in the required cut list that we'll be submitting with our ARB.
Okay, if there's no other questions on this slide, I'll go to the next one. So, and so while the latter part of the much of this meeting and the latter part of this meeting will focus on how the budget impacts the energy supplier assessment, ESA is just one of ODOE's funding sources. Each type of fund has a specific purpose or function that determines how it can be used. And the ESA is one of the largest sources of ODOE's operating funds, according to statute, in determining the amount of revenues that must be derived from the energy supplier's estimate. The director takes into account all other known or readily accessible sources for revenue to the Energy Facility Siting Council and Department, including the other sources you see on this slide, with the federal revenue, the fee for service and charge, and general fund programs. This means ODOE is constantly looking for other ways to fund our work. And as you saw in the last slide, we've added significant amounts of general funds and federal funds to our budget in the past 5 years. Diversifying our funding source is how we were able to keep the ESA increase last biennium relatively low, 1%. So while we're all doing this, the amount of ESA anticipated in our agency request budget equates to $2.17 per year per Oregonian, which is up 33 cents from last year, from the current year.
Michael, we do have a question on federal funding from Jennifer Jolly in the chat. Hi, Jennifer. She's wondering about the CPRG, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which we were really excited to get a big award last week. That application was led by DEQ and funds programs at a host of agencies. Michael, her question is any anticipated impact from that to the ODOE budget? Maybe talk a little bit about when that would show up in our budget. And as you're thinking about all that, there's one thing I just wanted to mention quickly. Earlier, folks were excited to hear that some of that grant funding will go to support heat pump programs in Oregon. And I just want to make sure folks know that we're really excited about that funding and it's good news. But at the level that we're being funded by the federal government, those would actually be cuts to the current funding for those programs that we received in either 2022 or in 2023. And so it's, and then also just to make sure folks know that given the 500,000 heat pump goal for the state, a lot more funding will be necessary to hit that goal, according to the research that we've seen. So I will just leave that there and then let Michael answer the bigger picture questions about when that will show up in our budget.
Thanks. And thanks for the question, Jennifer. So these grants will not show up in the agency request budget, as we have not gotten the legislative approval to include them in our budget. We recently announced the CPRG grants, the Solar for All and Homes in Here. While the federal government has told us that, yes, we will get these awards, we don't have official grant agreements in place yet. And that is usually the first step that the legislature or the e-board is looking for before they will approve that limitation. We are looking to, where possible, support funding for positions and other things within the grant source, including with the climate pollution reduction grants. And when those grants are coming, we would have to work with the legislature, either during session or through an e-board, to add any relevant positions to our budget. And I think that's for all of our grants. But you'll hear me say throughout this program, or anything where you see federal funding, it's something that we anticipate once our final budget is gone through, that those amounts would increase. And that's both the amount of funding and the position supported by the funding.
I would add that most of these federal grants, in particular the CPRG, for instance, is over time. That's a 5-year grant, so we won't see necessarily. We're not sure if we'll see that as a lump sum or over a 5-year period. So it could have a smaller impact on an annual basis.
Great, and I think everything else we either answered in the chat, so or we shared some links in there too. So I think
okay, great.
Slide.
And I know maybe speed it up here. No, looking at time. So here's a chart that shows us how the revenue sources that fund the agency in the operating budget, answering some of the questions here. This chart does not include SELP or incentive payments, which are passed through the agency and not part of our operating budget. So the charges for services includes our public purpose charge, money from the Bonneville Power Administration for the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, and P&I that we'll talk about later, and other fees for work we do for NEA and Energy Northwest. Other examples of other revenues include third-party reimbursement, interest, and funding for positions associated with the general fund, and that has to do with how that indirect rate is calculated for general fund positions. Any questions on this slide? Okay. Now we'll walk through our agency request budget, including policy option packages. First, here's a slide that provides a high-level look of how our agency is organized and the boards and commissions that we support and that oversee us. We'll spend some time going into detail on each program division. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on, but feel free to put any questions you have in the chat as we go through the presentation about what any of these sections are. So here's a breakdown. Here's an accounting of the agency's overall budget components and a projection of the ESA needed to fund each of these activities. This slide is for the entire agency and will be followed by a similar breakdown for each division and section within the agency. I'll spend some time going over this chart to ground everyone for the remaining charts. And the main components are personal services, services and supplies, and debt service. As you recall from the earlier slide, personal services are employee costs, services and supplies are operational expenditures, such as training, travel, professional services, etc. Special payments are transfers and payments where goods and services are not received in return, such as paying out contributions, loans, deposits, or collections. This also includes paying federal or state funds to eligible people, cities, counties, quasi-public agencies, and other others as incentives. In this line, in the chart, you'll see lines towards the bottom here for internal general fund transfers, and they represent technical budget accounting adjustment that I mentioned earlier. And here you can see how much of the ODOE budget in the last two biennia were the results of one-time funding, and that there is none of that investment in the 25-27 ARB. Programs funded through those transfers have been successful, providing energy savings to Oregonians and helping Oregon meet its energy goals. And the reason they do not appear in the budget is that they do not fit within the expenditure guidance given to all agencies in developing our ARB. And you'll notice how another trend here is that the travel actuals in 21-23 we're still showing the effects of the pandemic, but we are seeing those continue to increase in each biennium. As in-person meetings, trainings, and businesses continue to return in the current biennium. And debt service, as I mentioned before, will continue to decline in each biennium as the program's inactive, no longer making loans. And just again, on the right side of the chart, you can see how much ESA we are projecting as needed for each category. Are needed in each category, and you can see in the total row ESA is 13% of ODOE's overall budget. So we'll be going over kind of this format of the slides for a lot of the remaining parts of the presentation. So I'll stop here to see if there's any general questions on this or specific questions on this. All right. So for each program, we'll start with an overview of the division and their programs. Or for each division, we'll start with an overview of the division and their programs, followed by some highlights, and then a review of the staff structure and budget. And we'll start with P&I. The Planning and Innovation Division provides information, analysis, and technical assistance on energy efficiency, clean energy technologies, and climate change. This division has been restructured to account for the additional work assigned in the legislature by HB 3409. The division is made up of 4 sections: energy efficiency and conservation, technology and policy, and the 2 new sections in the biennium will be codes and standards and climate change. Both of these new sections and the staff that support them are mostly paid for with general fund. Planning and Innovation has had a busy biennium. This group was instrumental in Oregon getting the recently announced climate pollution reduction grant for $197 million. P&I is also leading the coordination and development of the Oregon Energy Strategy, which will be released next year. And the division is also supporting the revamped Oregon Climate Action Commission and developing the new Building Performance Standards program. All right. So this is another chart we'll see for each division, and the agency request budget for planning and innovation includes 40 staff and 40 full-time equivalent positions, or FTE. Please note that these counts, when we see these for each division, will be inclusive of positions listed in the policy option packages we'll discuss. The 2 members of the Oregon Northwest Power Council and Northwest Power and Conservation Council are funded by the Bonneville administration as a pass-through in ODOE's budget, which is why they show up here. So this slide shows a breakdown of the budget by program and the activities of the division. On the right side, you will see the revenue sources that support these activities. This graph on the left is an estimate based on expenditures in these areas in previous years and a projection of what will be spent in the biennium. You can see that a majority of the funding for this division, which traditionally has come from the energy supplier assessment, now comes from general fund, and federal fund making up a close third for support, demonstrating ODOE's efforts to diversify our funding stream. Other funding includes public purpose charge funds for the schools program and the large electric consumer program, which is also known as the self-direct program. Here's a multi-biennial look at the planning and innovation expenditures. And on the right-hand side, it's ESA support. One thing you may notice on this slide is an increase in AG fees, which is due to an increase in what the agency is being charged in DOJ, which is part of the inflation factor that is built into the budget. And this would be, there's 2 parts to the budget, which we talk about too, which is there's a part where we have state government service charges, and those are also up, and that's what every agency pays in to support the overall Department of Justice. But then there's also a services and supplies part of our budget, and that has an inflationary factor for DOJ as well. So here's the information broken down into each section of P&I. Just wanted to highlight again, if you looked at this slide on Friday or earlier today, please note that it's been updated to reflect a more granular detail on where the ESA is being spent in this division. You'll see that E&C and energy, technology, and planning sections are funded with 23% and 49% of ESA respectively, and energy, codes, and standards at just 3%. And couldn't fit all of those sections in one chart. So here is the next chart, which goes over the climate policy, which is 12% funded with ESA, and the Northwest Power Council, which again is not funded with ESA. And I will stop there for any questions? All right. So then we'll talk about the policy option packages for this division. And the first one is to a climate research prop, and it extends an LD position that the legislature provided in 3409 to align the position with the ongoing work that was also assigned in HB 3409. And this position is general fund supported. We're also excited about a POP for the rural efficiency projects, and it complements our federal RETA grant program with general fund dollars to support energy projects identified by audits completed under the Oregon Rural and Agricultural Energy Assistance Program. Note that when we showed this POP earlier in April, it was entitled the Rural Energy Projects Fund, but we got some good feedback, and the name was changed to reflect this. So Energy Development Services is our next division, and it's the division that's probably seen the most change from in the last few biennia, going from being primarily tasked with administrating inactive or sunsetting programs to standing up and administering new programs, to beginning to incorporate a lot of the federal funding that we're talking about, and now looking at phasing out some of these state programs in our agency request budget. This slide shows the current work of the Energy Development Services Division, and the grayed out sections represent programs that are being phased out in our agency request budget because they were one-time funded programs. And that's the solar and storage rebate program, the energy efficient wildfire rebuilding, and our 2 heat pump programs. This division is where most of the federally funded programs live and will live, including grid resilience and solar for all. And again, as we saw in the budget, this division has the inactive SELP program. And here you can see some of the great support our incentive programs have been providing for Oregonians. This includes providing incentives for over 70 megawatts of solar generation to single family homes and providers of services to low and moderate income individuals. We are on track to provide incentives to install almost 3,000 heat pumps and rental units, and are launching our grid resilience program, which will improve Oregon's electric grid infrastructure and provide community benefits. The EDS division has 17 staff and 17 FTE. And I'll note here there is a new section for those who are following our budget, which is the federal incentive programs. And this, again, is a section that we anticipate will grow in this biennium as we begin to receive federal funds and those get incorporated into our budget. You'll see on the next slide that this division will be significantly smaller than it is in the current division, but we will still be operating the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program. And we also expect federal incentive programs in this section to increase as more federal funding is received. Note that the Community Renewable Investment Fund is an example of the intra-agency transfers, as it shows up as other funds, but it actually comes from, it was originally sourced from general fund. Here you can see the one-time reduction in investments in the total in that second row from the bottom, the interagency third from the bottom, the total less interagency general fund transfers. And you can see the reduction in special payments also that reflects the kind of nature of the program in the agency request budget, as some of these incentive programs are being phased out. This information is again a breakdown by section. Energy efficiency financing is relates, you can see, is minor and relates to our some of our SELP debt service. going. All right. And here are the federal incentive and SELP sections. The federal incentive section will include any general fund match that is given to support the federal grants, such as in grid resilience. And you'll see there's no ESA supporting the energy development services programs. We do have a policy option package for the energy incentive programs. We have noted that there are efficiencies to be gained from having permanent program staff that provide continuity and institutional knowledge and who can support emerging incentive discussions, help prepare for any new incentive programs before dedicated staff can be onboarded, who can help provide surge staffing for existing programs or administer the tail of programs that have sunset or don't have dedicated staff. And so this POP is to try to establish those positions. You'll note that while we don't have a POP to extend all of the programs, given the 1% guidance, it's because those programs would be much more than 1% of CSL, but we do think it's important to have permanent staffing to provide all of that coverage. And in April, when we first talked about this POP and Inspire, we talked about funding it with general fund for these permanent positions. But again, with that not fitting within our 1% CSL, we will instead plan to work to fund these positions with any available funding that comes through our federal grants or incentive, any incentive programs that remain.
Hi, Michael.
Yes.
We have a hand up, and it's Brad Reed from the Building Resilience Coalition.
Hi, Brad.
There you go.
Hello, I think I'm unmuted. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Appreciate the explanation on the various incentive programs. Many folks from our more than 50 organization coalition have keyed in on the heat pump programs. First of all, congratulations to ODOE for getting that money out to help people, as well as the really successful applications to the federal program, CPRG grants. That's all very exciting news. The fact that the funds from this year were reserved in one day for the rental home heat pump program just shows the incredible need. And so what it sounds like is that you all won't be able to put a POP forward for those incentive programs, but I guess I just wanted to be on the record for the incredible support that our coalition has for those programs, and that we will be advocating with the governor and the legislature to get as much funding in those as possible, especially as we deal with the hottest year in human history and the incredible need that ODOE itself uncovered for cooling across Oregon. So I just wanted to say that on the record. I guess my question is, we won't be seeing any POPs coming forward for those programs. It's something that legislators will have to put forward themselves. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, those POPs to extend those programs would not be included. You won't see those in our agency request budget. Again, the budget process is iterative, so that's not to say that it, given changes in revenue forecasts or other things, that it won't appear in the governor's recommended budget or in the legislature. That is, at this point, we'll put forward our agency request budget and provide information on the great work that it's been doing, but it's going to be in the, if it shows up now, it'll have to show up either in the governor's budget or be put in by the legislature.
Thanks, Michael. We have a couple of other hands up. I figured it'd be a good time to go ahead and get to those as well. Claire Prihoda is first up, and Claire, you'll be next.
Thanks, Christy. +1 to everything that Brad mentioned. The ODOE's done such amazing work, first with the cooling needs study and with these incredible heat pump incentives. You've seen exactly how needed they are with how fast the funds are going out the door. So just expressing strong support that if the opportunity arises for ODOE to reinsert them later on as more general fund looks to be available. Would love to have you join us in what will be Building Resilience as Advocacy to fund those incentives again. So thanks so much for the information.
Thanks, Claire. And then also Greer Koplacki is next. You should be off mute now, Greer.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry, thank you. I'm in headphones, so I want to check. Yeah, plus one to what Brad was saying, we're part of the Building Resilience Coalition here at Community Energy Project. And I just wanted to state again the importance of heat pumps. As Brad said, we can see with the fact that the funding was allocated in a day, which is amazing. It just goes to show, we know that 58% of, Oregon's residents don't have proper cooling systems. And we know that we really are, hitting a record year for heat. At Community Energy Project, we do, home repairs and do weatherization to help folks get that cooling, and heat pumps to make sure that it, guarantees cooling for all, ultimately lowers utility bills and cuts climate pollution. So we're very supportive of additional funding for the heat pumps. Thank you.
Thanks, Greer. All right. Now we also have Dave Kobar with his hand up. Dave, you should be able to talk now.
Hi, I just want to start off by saying thank you to the panelists and ODOE for this presentation today. I just want to second also what's been said, and especially with what's been going on with the early fire season, that the heat pump is a closed system that protects against wildfire smoke as well. And I think that's sort of a timely thing to acknowledge within this. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dave. And then we also have a question from Jennifer, and she's asking, what's the proposal here? She's hearing a lot of support for keeping the heat pump programs in particular going. And then she's asking, can you put a POP forward without an identified fund source?
Can try to take
I guess the first part of the answer is, well, you go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it's the proposal here is for some positions that would be available for funding or permanent positions, with the funding source being any programs that would have so what we do is positive time keep to the position. So you're looking at our federal programs that are coming in, and any remaining funding that would exist with our existing programs that haven't been spent by the biennium, that we would be able to allocate some of that money or some of those funding to these positions to continue to both administer the sunset of the program as well as when our new federal position, or as we anticipate federal funding coming in, having some positions to use that funding to support the onboarding of new staff or as those programs get ramped up. And we also have the Community Renewable Grant Program, which we do have some funding that we anticipate remaining at the end of this biennium that could also be used to partially support those positions. So that one's going to have to be an amalgamation of different funding streams that we'll have to work with the governor's office and CFO and the legislature to get on board. And we would only be able to hire those positions when we have the funding identified.
Hey, Michael, is it fair to say we will not be proposing to fund these positions with the energy supplier assessment?
It is more than fair to say we are not proposing to use ESA to fund any of these positions. ODOE would not recommend that or offer that.
And do we have a dollar estimate for the cost?
Off the top, I do, and let me go back to my notes.
You know what? Why don't you keep going on the presentation, Michael, and we'll get back to Jennifer Jolly with the dollar estimate.
And then
Yeah.
I'll just say there was one last question here that I think I can go ahead and answer quickly. Should folks be advocating for more funding for the heat pump program with the governor, our legislators, or with the Department of Energy? I suppose the answer is all of the above are an appropriate venue for advocating for anything that you'd like to related to this budget. We're happy to pass on what we're hearing as the governor's recommended budget is considered. Make sure folks at the governor's office know what we're hearing from our external partners. But at this point, the decisions will be made not by us, right? By the governor for her recommended budget, and then later for the legislature for their adopted budget.
All right. So I will continue next slide and maybe speed it up some here because try to keep us on target. Thanks everyone for being with us so far. Next we have the nuclear safety and energy security section. Sorry. The Nuclear Safety and Energy Preparedness Division is being renamed the Nuclear Safety and Energy Security Energy Security Division, and this reflects the increased focus on developing the energy security plan and working with counties on their resilience planning. In addition to that new work, this division continues its role in representing Oregon's interest in the Hanford nuclear facility cleanup and managing radioactive waste disposal regulations, which does have some general fund support in preparing for nuclear related emergencies and leading the state's petroleum emergency preparedness work. This division recently launched the County Resilience Program, which will support each of Oregon's 36 counties in their own energy resilience plan. The division is also hard at work developing the state's energy security plan, leading the effort and coordinating with other state agencies, USDOE, counties and local governments, tribal governments, citizen groups, utilities, nonprofit organizations, businesses, industry, just about everyone in the public. The plan will assess risks and threats to Oregon's energy systems and will identify and prioritize mitigation options for Oregon as a whole, as well as specific regions throughout the state that can be implemented in the future to improve Oregon's energy security. A draft of the plan was released last year and is available on our website, and the final plan will be released this September. So we're looking forward to seeing that. This division has 7 staff and 6.25 FTE. The County Resilience Coordinator that you see in the bottom right there, position only extends to December when ODOE anticipates the current work around county resilience planning to be wrapped up, which is why it shows as 0.25 FTE. And Christy, if there's questions along the way, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep on going. So nuclear safety and energy security is primarily supported.
You're so fast, Michael. I just really quickly want to answer one question that I haven't even read one that just came in. Let's see. Linda Craig asked a follow-up on advocating. She said, can we submit written comments to you with a copy to the governor's office? That's fine. It might be more direct to go to the governor's office and CC us. Either way, the right people will get them. Let me just have a point here from Eric that it seems the mitigation of nuclear risks should not compete with nor suppress the development of new clean energy sources. I think that's just a comment there. And then Jennifer is wondering how many counties have applied for the new county resilience planning grant that just opened. And I think we got our first application last week, which is really exciting because the program just opened recently.
Yeah. I think Max is on if he has more that you want to say there. Okay.
I am here. Thanks, Michael. It was Harney County that's applied. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. So yes, this division is primarily supported with grant funding, federal funding from USDOE for its work on Hanford, for the Hanford cleanup and emergency planning. We also receive fees from radioactive waste haulers and general fund to support the radioactive waste disposal, and ESA resources are used to support ODO's emergency preparedness work, including the fuel action planning. Here's a breakdown of nuclear safety and energy security budget. And I'll just give you a second to look at that. Hopefully all feeling pretty familiar by now. And here I'll note that the special payments are often special payments to counties that help with our counties and other agencies that help with our emergency preparedness and resilience work. Next, I'll go to our programmatic division of the Energy Facility Siting division, and it's one of ODO's primary statutory responsibilities. It ensures that proposed energy facilities meet specific statewide and local standards and are considered with public input and participation. We've seen an uptick in proposed projects and amendments over the last few years, leading to an increased work for the team and for the Energy Facility Siting Council. Sorry, I'm trying to go too fast now. So as you can see, this division has been busy. We've been holding FSAC meetings across the state nearly every month in the last 2 years. The division takes seriously its role in receiving and reviewing almost 500 public comments, and has also been working to improve the efficiency of the siting process through rulemaking programs and program evaluation. The division has 14 staff in FTE, representing 11% of the ODO's employees. There are currently 6 siting analysts to evaluate proposed projects, and 3 focused on oversight and monitoring existing projects. And this includes an additional position we are proposing in a policy option packages, which I'll talk about shortly. The energy facility siting is primarily funded by fees paid by developers seeking a site certificate. The fees are set on a cost recovery basis and therefore are unique to each project. You'll see that ESA does cover some portion of ODO's siting work. This is by statute. ESA covers work that can't be charged to developers, but which supports the work of the division and the agency. This can include non-project specific costs like rulemaking and non-siting tasks like legislative testimony, budget preparation, and strategic planning. And work on strategic planning. Here's the detail for the division. You'll notice that a significant amount of AG fees reflecting the litigious nature of the siting process and the varied views of the interested parties that this division works with. So as I mentioned in the slide before, we anticipate an increased need for compliance activities as the number of approved siting projects and operating facilities in the state increases. This POP would have a small ESA impact, but the position will only be hired if there are available billable project hours to support the majority of the position costs. Next, we have the Administrative Services Division, which includes the Director's Office and Central Services. The Director's Office employees provide resources and services agency-wide for audit, communication, public records requests, and strategic engagement with stakeholders, citizens, and elected officials. Central Services handles our employee payroll, contracts and procurement, grant management, budget, accounting, information technology, and other agency-wide services. And this division has also been busy this biennium. We're really proud to have stood up the Community Navigator program and making sure we are connecting with every part of the state, meeting with almost every federally recognized tribe and county in Oregon. We also have a great podcast called Grounded, which was recently relaunched with a new host from the communications team. This is like a podcast that covers a variety of topics that talks to energy folks in different fields and subject areas. The information is fun and informative, so if you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend you do. And you can find them anywhere you get your podcast. This division has also been leading coordination on all of the federal money we are tracking and trying to bring in into Oregon, and I would say thus far pretty successfully. The first section is the director's office with 11 staff and 11.05 FTE, which includes one FTE for a POP that I'll discuss shortly, and the 0.5 FTE is for a grant position that has direct funding, or a part of a grant position that has direct funding. The central services section supports all areas of the agency and is funded through the indirect rate. This means that each division pays into a cost pool to fund the activities of this division. And I'll note here that HR shows up here functionally in our budget, but reports to the director. Administrative services is funded mostly through the indirect rate, as you can see here, which is supported by each of our funding sources, including the energy supplier assessment. It is also supported directly by the energy supplier assessment, federal and general funds. And note that because ESA contributes to the indirect rate, the ESA percentage funding the administrative services division is larger than the 19% it shows here. And that will be reflected on the next slide. And this is the same chart as the previous slide, but we've shown the fund sources that make up the indirect rates. So for example, you can see that ESA funds 19% of the administrative services budget, but then provides another 26% through the indirect rate. Costs for the indirect pool are paid for by all direct positions based on how they are funded. So this is showing the indirect cost pool breakdown, including the contributions. The source of funding for each position is how they pay for that. This slide gives a bit more insight into how each funding source pays for. And that's I gave a little bit more on how each funding source pays for the indirect rate. And then here again is a detailed chart of the division and the ESA support anticipated in the biennium. Moving along on this, here is a chart again. We go through by each section, which is the director's office and central services. And we are proposing a POP that would allow us to offer internships more equitably by paying our interns. And this POP would be funded by general fund. It is 1 FTE, which we anticipate will support up to 8 3-month internships. We are also proposing a POP to expand our successful community navigator program as we've been out, our community navigator program. As we've been out in the field meeting with people, it has become clear that more resources are needed to be able to address the needs of Oregon communities. We are asking for funding within the 1% limit to be able to provide support through contractors to these communities. And this is a general fund ask for this POP. The next POP consists of 2 positions within our employee services section to help with succession planning, support our team members, and increase the skills and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging fluency of our staff. These positions would be part of the indirect pool and therefore would be partially funded with ESA. All right, so keep an eye on time. Here's a summary of everything we're going through and how much we expect to spend in each division. So then, as you're probably familiar with your budgets, you have to do some scenario planning, and we have, as part of the state budget process, all agencies are required to come up with a 5% and 10% cut list which outlines how an agency would plan to respond to a revenue reduction. So this is an area where we've kind of, as people said, taken a look at what areas should it be necessary that ODOE can reduce spending to still meet our targets. And it shows how much we're cutting under each of these scenarios. So on this chart, you can see that P&I receives $25 million in their budget, so they would need to identify $2.5 million in reductions should that be necessary. And before I get into the next slide, I'll stop to see if there's any questions on this slide. All right.
Michael, let's go to the next one because that's where there might be some questions or feedback.
So I know some of you would like to know how ODOE goes about sharpening our pencils and figuring out where we can cut. Here are some of the options that we're considering if we have to make cuts in our budget. So ODOE, we strive to run efficiently and be good stewards of public funds and only increase expenses when necessary. And as such, any reductions in the budget will have an impact on the delivery of programs and services. In the event we are asked by the governor or the legislature to make cuts from our agency request budget, here are the categories that we would prioritize reducing and the impacts we believe they would have. We would start with services and supplies and look to hold off hiring any vacant positions. Anticipating that these cuts may be necessary, ODOE has held off on hiring some administrative support positions this biennium to the extent we can, while still getting our necessary work done. And at some, as we go through that, we would prioritize cutting our supplies and positions. And at this point, I would welcome any questions or comments on the potential options we have discussed here. All right, we'll now talk about the energy supplier assessment. This is a 10-year history of the ESA. Note that these bars are not adjusted for inflation. And as you can see from this chart, ODOE has tried to maintain the stability of the ESA and the makeup. This includes the last biennium when we were able to hold off. We were able to hold the ESA essentially flat because of general fund and federal fund investments to offset the inflationary increases. And some of that support phases out in this budget, resulting in an atypical increase. However, looking over the entire period, this represents an annualized increase of 3.6% to the ESA in the last 10 years. Remember, the ESA amount could change throughout the budget process as we add federal funds. If the legislature adds more general funded programs, the ESA number will go down because there will be more the general fund and federal fund positions supporting our administrative costs. So during our budget discussions with the EAWG last month, I talked about how our budget and its ESA impact would change from the current service level presented in that meeting to this agency request budget, with the expectation that the addition of some of our POPs would reduce the ESA impact. And we saw that it did slightly, and this is because the additional positions in our POPs help spread the cost of our indirect pool funding to other programs. This chart shows how those actions impacted the ESA in the next biennium, from CSL to here. And it's the ESA and can change as it goes through the governor's office and the legislature. I should also note here that we're just crunching the numbers all the way, kind of getting ready for this. So these are numbers that we're projecting now. Our ARB does still need to go through DAS audit. ESA can change to go through here. And are there any questions about our projected revenue need to fund programs and the projected allocation derived from ESA?
Looks like we have some hands up. Nate Rivera has his hand up. And then we're working to answer other questions in the chat right now.
All right. Hi, Nate.
To your go back maybe one slide. I think it was one. And you said, since I think it was the 15-17 biennium, yeah, go back right there. So this to me is not an accurate representation, because if you include the 13 through 15 biennium, the ESA has had about a 94% increase over the since that time period, if this budget's approved. So it's almost doubled. So I don't feel like that's an accurate representation, leaving that previous number off. And then if you go back 2 slides, the proposed cuts. So do you have the ability to do these potential reductions now? These things are in your control, or they're only in your control if you get directed from the governor's office to do the 5 or 10%?
I think there are some things that are in our control and we're doing now. As I mentioned, trying to be careful about our hiring, making sure we're matching resources, not hiring all the positions we have. Janine mentioned looking at reducing our travel spending and training as it comes forward. How that gets reflected in the budget, maybe through offset savings, or if we are asked by the governor or the legislature for cuts in the budget. And then to your question, so that 10-year chart is something that we that's one that we've done every budget cycle, and it's been a 10-year look back. So that wasn't, picked for what that percentage is. And then I'd have to go back to that other budget to see what the annualized rate of growth there was. Now we're talking about 12 years and looking at what that rate of increase would have been. But I can try to do that if you need.
We'd be happy to get back.
Yeah, happy to get back to you on that one.
I'll just add, I think if you were to go back even further past the 2013, you would see the ESA actually higher than it was. If I recall, this was before I got here, but it was cut significantly during that biennium for a variety of reasons. But yeah, we can go back and look at some math. The other thing I'd point out is it's not adjusted for inflation. But regardless, we, having this slide is a good one to end on, because we are thinking about ways that we can reduce the ESA and also reduce the pressure on the ESA. I mean, one of the reasons we've talked about why the increase from 21-23 to 23-25 was so small is that we were able to diversify ODOE's budget and really bring in federal and general funds. Those are not reflected yet in our 25-27 budget. So we have a number of strategies, some of which we can control, some of which we can't, that we'll be looking at, because we understand there's a lot of rate pressure on utilities right now, and we want to do our part to help reduce that.
I don't see any other hands up. Nate does point out some yeah, the inflation, it was 34% over the same time. So
we'll look at that. I'm happy to get back with that information.
Technically, Nate's hand is still up, but I'm assuming it's up from before. Unless Nate, okay. Okay. No other hands are up and no other comments.
So thanks for everyone for going through that. I know that's a lot of information. And so where do we go from here? ODOE will submit our agency request budget to the state's chief financial office later this week. Then we'll work with the governor they will work with the governor to review our agency request budget along with the request budgets of all the other state agencies and consolidate them into the governor's recommended budget, which will be provided to the legislature. Janine mentioned before, this process is different this year. The governor's guidance was, the 1% target to match with revenue. So we imagine working with them, but that our budget will look fairly similar. And then the legislature will ultimately determine ODOE's budget during the 2025 session. This legislative process will include a hearing on ODO's budgets and ways and means, where you'll be able to provide public comment in multiple formats. And that'll probably happen January and February, March. And in addition to our budget bill, just so everyone's aware, in addition to our budget bill, other actions can be taken during the session, which may impact the agency and ODO and ultimately ESA and our legislatively approved budget. And I know I'm a little bit over time, so thank you for your patience here. Finally, here are some links to documents that can provide more information on how the budget and the legislative processes are developed. We will post our final agency request budget to our website with all the supporting documentation after it's submitted to the CFO's office. All right, so that was a lot of slides and even more information. So thank you for your time and for the questions today. And I hope you walked away with a better understanding of ODO's budget, how our programs support the state's energy goals, and how our budget was developed and the role that ESA plays in funding the department. If you have any questions about what you've seen today or about the budget process in general, feel free to raise your hand or ask in chat. Also feel free to reach out to me directly as we move through the budget process, follow up with questions. And with that, I'll take any questions. Otherwise, have a great evening.
Thanks, Michael. 61 slides, done at 5.
I threw those last ones, so if anyone goes through later and also has questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us. Are there questions?
I see a question from Jennifer Jolly. How do other general fund agencies deal with salary increases without going over 1%? I think they get something called a salary pot.
Yeah, so a salary pot is the so when we talked about the personal service increases and the COLAs, that's a salary pot, and that's built into our current service level budget. So the state CFO's office does some calculations about what they project those salary pots, what impact they'll have on the next biennium, and then incorporates that into the current service level. So that's part of the reason why you saw our current service level budget was up so much, and other state agencies' current service level budgets would be up as well to account for the difference in the personal services. So
Can I say it another way? So general fund is provided for those agencies to deal with salary increases within current service level. So it doesn't need to be included in the 1% because it's included in the current service level.
Yes.
But I will add that we are not the only other fund agency that is challenged by the increasing administrative costs and the impact that those have on the other funds and the fees that we are supported with.
For the question, Jennifer. All right, hang out for a few more seconds, but if there are no more questions, and thank you everyone for your time today.